In this painting demonstration, I'm going to show how I take the pretty divergent colors in a painting of a terracotta pot with two yellowish-green pears and unify the whole painting while that painting is still about the juxtaposition of color in the subject area. I started with a quick block in what looks like an earth tone, but I'm actually using paint from my palette that's left over from a previous painting, so it's very much grayed down, and that reduces the intensity. That was a very warm, almost orangish, reddish color, which I then mixed in the rest of the grays that were on my palette so that they would lean in that purple direction of the environment. Here what you see me doing is I mixed some purples in the subject area so that the eye would go there. But notice how I'm also pulling in some of that environment purple color to bring it all together. So this keeps the painting unified. At this point, I'm moving into those bright greens. I like to get the primary subject of a painting established early so that I can calibrate everything else against it. Once the main tone or the hue of those greens and yellows is established, then I can compare the terracotta pot, which is secondary to the pears, to the primary color of the pears, that bright yellow. One of the things that I'm working out right here is what is the color difference? What is the temperature? What is the light or intensity difference between the top of the pot, which is just true terracotta, and the bottom of the pot, which is glazed? Because the real life setup really works, that those two different colors on the pot really work with the almost chartreusey greens and yellows on the pear, I took some time to get into that color family on the pot and get it just right. And that means I now need to return to the pears and do the same thing there. I'm asking myself how much blue, how much green, how much purple is going on the shade areas where there isn't as much intense light, and how much is going in the lit areas. Now, these yellow pears naturally have a little bit of orange in them. So remember, one of the things that's marrying the whole painting is that paint that I used, the grays that were previously on my palette, and I warmed them up with a bit of orange and purple. So I'm letting some of that show through, and I'm using that and mixing it into the pears here and there. By the same token, I'm taking some of that color from the pear and making sure that it blasts out into the environment, into those cast shadows, reflecting into them, and even onto the front end of the environment on the right side. You'll notice now, as I'm about halfway through the painting, that I start working in smaller areas. I've been working macro to micro the whole time, getting the big areas established first, just to make sure that I had color families that make sense. At various times during the painting, I ask myself, is this really telling the story of color, or what I call the color story, that I want to tell with the painting? So you'll see that as I get to that point, I start to push areas and decide about their shapes, about the different colors that I see. There's some blue bounced light on the left-hand back side of that terracotta pot. There's some pretty strong purple in between that pear on the right and the terracotta pot next to it. That also means that the terracotta color is bouncing onto the pear, and some of that pear color, as you see down to the lower right, is bouncing into the environment, which is going to take down the intensity of the purple on the right-hand side. But that purple is really showing up more intense in the middle, in the subject area. Now that's intentional. In reality, that purple may be a little bit less intense than I'm showing it right there, but I want to draw the eye to that area. By making that purple nice and intense, the orange that's on the reflected light area of the pear and the shade side, that's going to light up a little bit more and create a little bit more electricity and energy in the painting. So now, as you see, I'm coming in towards the end of the painting. I'm starting to think about drawing problems. How accurate are the shapes? Do the transitions make sense? Do they look round? Are there any details? And I'm very careful about adding only the necessary details, but sometimes there are details that are needed in order for the drawing or the subject to make sense. And finally, I know I'm about to finish the painting. So I've got all those darkest darks in. I've worked out the color families and established those. I put the intensity where I want it. So now I'll drop in some of those highlights, as you see. Those highlights really finalize for the viewer where the form is. A funny thing happens when I start putting highlights in. Because I now have the full value range from darkest dark to lightest lights, I can once again take a step back and ask, how is everything working together? And that's where I can really start to think about final details or final adjustments to make sure the whole painting is married, but also the areas where I do want to create some contrast and draw the eye or create intensity or excitement. This is my opportunity to finalize those before I wrap up the painting. So you'll start to see here, I'm making those little final adjustments that also impact the viewer's experience as they look at the composition. So that light shining around the left back side of the pot is important because it pulls everything together almost into a circle there. The light on top of the leaf is very blue, but it's a small area, so it really had to wait until the last minute. And now you'll just see some final touches in the yellows and also in the environment, because what I do around the pears will bring out as much of the yellow as adding yellow to the pears at the very last minute while I'm working out those final highlights.